So, this happened last Saturday and I'm still processing everything, but I need to get this out because what comes next is going to be absolutely nuclear. And I want people to understand why I'm about to do what I'm about to do. I quote, "Am 29 years old and I've spent the last 3 years building something my family knows absolutely nothing about. They still think I'm the loser who takes the bus everywhere and can barely function as an adult. And honestly, I've let them think that because I knew eventually they'd give me the perfect opportunity to use everything I've been working toward." Let me back up. My sister Emma is 5 years older than me and has always been the golden child. She got into a good college, married Chester, who works in finance, bought a house in the suburbs, the whole package. Meanwhile, I struggled through community college, failed my driver's test multiple times because I have genuinely terrible spatial awareness and worked a bunch of random jobs that never seemed to stick. For years, my family treated me like I was this embarrassing burden they had to deal with at family gatherings. What they don't know is that 4 years ago, I started working remotely for a tech company doing data analysis. It pays well, really well. And 3 years ago, after a particularly brutal Thanksgiving dinner where my dad, Lawrence, spent 30 minutes telling everyone about how I got fired from yet another retail job, I made a decision. I was done trying to prove myself to them through normal means. They'd already decided who I was in their minds, and nothing I said would change that. So I just stopped talking about my life entirely. I kept taking the bus even though I could afford a car because honestly the bus works fine for me and I don't care about driving. I kept living in my small apartment even though I could afford better because it's close to everything I need. I stopped mentioning work at all. When they asked what I was doing, I just say I was freelancing and changed the subject. They interpreted my silence as confirmation that I was still failing at life. And I let them think that. The wedding invitation arrived 2 months ago. Emma and Chester were getting married at this nice venue outside the city. The invitation had my name on it. But when I called Emma to confirm I was coming, she got really quiet and then told me she needed to talk to me about something. She said that Chester's family was very traditional and they were trying to keep the wedding classy and she needed me to understand that this was a really important day for her. She couldn't have anything go wrong. I asked her what she meant by that and she basically said that she knew I was going through a rough time and she understood that things had been hard for me, but she really needed me to make an effort to look presentable and not mention anything embarrassing about my life to Chester's family. She actually used the phrase, "make an effort," like I was some kind of project she had to manage. I told her I'd be there and I'd be on my best behavior. She seemed relieved. What I didn't know until I showed up at the venue last Saturday was that Emma had put me on a literal do not admit list with the security staff. I found this out when I walked up to the entrance with an envelope containing $2,000 in cash as a wedding gift. And the security guy checked his clipboard and told me there had been a mistake with my invitation and I wasn't actually supposed to be there. I stood there for a second trying to process what he just said. I asked him if he was serious and he looked genuinely uncomfortable and said he was just doing his job and the bride had been very clear about the list. He showed me the clipboard and there was my name with "Do not admit" written next to it in Emma's handwriting. Here's the thing about me that my family has never understood. I don't yell or make scenes or get visibly angry. I get very quiet and very focused and I start thinking about next steps. So I looked at this security guy who was just trying to do his job. And I told him I understood, but I was going to go inside anyway because this was my sister's wedding and I had a gift to deliver. He started to object, but I just walked past him. The reception was in full swing when I got inside. Everyone was already seated and the speeches were about to start. I walked straight to the gift table in the back and that's when Chester saw me. He was standing near the bar with some of his groomsmen and his face just went white. He said, "Oh shit," the family stain actually showed his face, loud enough that people at the nearby tables turned to look. Emma was at the head table and she saw me right as I was setting down the envelope. She literally grabbed her veil like she was going to use it as a shield and told someone to get security because they were supposed to handle this. She said her brother, who still takes the bus, right there in front of everyone. My dad, Lawrence, stood up from his table. He's the kind of guy who thinks everything is a teaching moment and loves to hold court in public. He announced to the entire room that everyone should meet the son who couldn't pass a driver's test 11 times. People started laughing, but it was that uncomfortable laughter where they're not sure if they're supposed to find it funny or not. My mom, Kimberly, decided to join in. She said really loudly that I'd called her crying last week because my microwave broke and I didn't know what to do. That wasn't even true. I'd called her to ask if she wanted to meet for lunch and mentioned in passing that I was getting a new microwave, but she twisted it into this whole thing about me being helpless. My Uncle Dennis was already drunk at the bar and he shouted something about how I'd gotten fired from a car wash for being too slow. Also not true. I'd worked at a car wash for exactly 2 weeks 5 years ago and quit because the manager was a nightmare. But why would anyone care about the actual truth? My grandpa was sitting at a corner table and I heard him mutter something about how in his day they drowned the weak ones. He's 87 and says horrible stuff like that all the time and everyone just laughs it off like it's charming. I placed the envelope on the gift table and nodded once to Emma. Then I walked out. The security guy was still at the entrance looking mortified and he started to apologize, but I told him it was fine and left. I went home and I sat in my apartment and I thought about every single thing I'd been planning for the last 3 years. I thought about the fact that I've been quietly covering my parents' mortgage for the last 18 months because Dad's business has been struggling and they were about to lose the house. They don't know the payments are coming from me because I had it set up through a third party. I thought about the fact that I'd been sending Emma money every month under the guise of small loans that she'd never paid back, but that she'd come to rely on for her lifestyle. Because Chester's job isn't actually as great as everyone thinks it is. I thought about the fact that I know exactly why Emma married Chester, even though she's miserable with him, and it has everything to do with maintaining appearances for our parents. I thought about the fact that I have information about Chester's real financial situation that Emma doesn't even know about because he's been lying to her for months. I thought about a lot of things. And then at 5 a.m. Sunday morning, my phone started buzzing. Text messages from Emma, from Chester, from my parents, from Uncle Dennis. All of them saying variations of the same thing about how they were drunk and it was just a joke and they didn't mean it. And I need to understand that weddings are stressful and everyone was just having fun. Emma sent me 12 messages in a row saying, "Please, brother, please let us explain. Please make it stop." I didn't respond to any of them because here's what they don't understand. I didn't walk out of that wedding hurt or embarrassed or looking for an apology. I walked out knowing that I'd just been handed exactly what I needed to do what I've been planning to do for 3 years. They gave me the justification I was waiting for. Tomorrow morning, I'm making some calls. The mortgage payments stop immediately. The money I've been sending Emma stops. And that's just the beginning because I have access to things and information they don't even know I have. They keep messaging me asking what they can do to fix this. But this isn't something that gets fixed. This is something that gets settled. So the comments on my last post were wild, and thank you to everyone who said I should absolutely follow through with this. To the people saying I'm being petty or that family is family no matter what, you weren't there, and you don't know the full story yet. Monday morning, I made the first call. I contacted the company handling the mortgage payments for my parents' house and told them to stop all future payments effective immediately. The payment that was supposed to go through on the 15th isn't happening. I also canceled the standing transfer I'd set up for Emma. She's been getting $800 a month from me for the last year and a half through what looked like an insurance refund system. She has no idea it's from me. My phone exploded Monday afternoon. Emma called me 17 times. I didn't answer, but I listened to the voicemails and they were frantic. The first few were apologetic about Saturday. By the 8th one, she was crying, saying she needed help with something urgent. My mom called around 3. I answered because I wanted to hear how she'd spin this. She started with the concerned mother routine, asking if I was okay. I let her talk for a minute, then asked her directly if she was calling because she was actually concerned or because she'd gotten a notice from the mortgage company. She got quiet. Then she said she didn't know what I was talking about and I needed to stop being dramatic about a few jokes at a wedding. I told her the mortgage payment that was supposed to go through wasn't coming and neither were any future ones. She tried to tell me I was confused and Dad had been handling everything. I told her to check with the bank and hung up. Tuesday morning, my dad showed up at my apartment. He couldn't get past the lobby, but made such a scene the front desk threatened to call the police. I went down because I didn't want the building staff dealing with his nonsense. He was pacing in the lobby and immediately started in about how I was being childish and vindictive. I asked if he wanted this conversation in the lobby where neighbors could hear or somewhere else. We ended up in his car in the parking garage. My dad has never been good at admitting when he's wrong. He spent 10 minutes trying to convince me Saturday was just normal family teasing and I was too sensitive. He said everyone makes jokes at weddings. I asked if he thought putting me on a do not admit list was a joke. He said he didn't know anything about that. I told him the mortgage payments were done. He asked what mortgage payments and I laid it all out. His business failing for 2 years, the refinanced house with maxed equity 3 months from foreclosure when I started making payments 18 months ago. I'd been watching and planning and waiting. He tried to deny it, but I had copies of everything on my phone. Bank statements, foreclosure notices, all of it. I'd had access because I'd been paying for everything. He sat there looking at the documents, realizing I'd known exactly how bad things were this entire time. Then he tried a different approach. If I'd been helping them all this time, then I must care and should continue because that's what family does. He said I was being cruel by pulling support just because my feelings got hurt. I told him I wasn't pulling support because my feelings got hurt. I was done pretending any of them deserved my help after 3 years of being treated like I was worthless while literally keeping their house from foreclosure. He got angry, really angry, said I was ungrateful and selfish and did I forget everything they'd done for me growing up. They'd put a roof over my head and fed me and I owed them. I asked if 18 months of mortgage payments didn't cover whatever I owed. He didn't have an answer. The conversation went in circles for 20 minutes. He tried guilt, anger, bargaining. Said if I'd help them through this rough patch, they'd make it up to me. Emma was going through a hard time and needed family support. I was being vindictive and would regret this when they lost the house. I told him they were going to lose the house either way. He asked what I wanted from him. An apology, money, what would fix this? I told him there was nothing he could offer. I got out and went back upstairs. Emma showed up Wednesday evening. She got past the front desk claiming family emergency. When I opened the door, she looked terrible. Red eyes, no sleep. She came in without asking and sat on my couch crying. She told me everything was falling apart. Chester had been lying about his job. He'd been let go 3 months ago and pretending to go to work while doing gig delivery jobs. The wedding cost $40,000 on credit cards because Chester kept saying he had a new job lined up. The job fell through. They couldn't make payments, and the $800 a month had suddenly stopped. She said she didn't know where else to turn. She'd borrowed from Chester's parents who were upset about wedding costs. Friends didn't have money. Mom and Dad couldn't help with their own mortgage issues. I was her last option. I asked if she'd told Chester about coming here. She said no because he was humiliated and didn't want anyone knowing he'd lost his job. I asked if she remembered what Chester called me at her wedding. She flinched. I asked if she remembered the do not admit list. She cried harder. She said she'd been trying to protect me. Chester's family was judgmental and had made comments about her family not being as successful. She didn't want them having more ammunition. She thought if I didn't come, no one would ask questions. Mom had suggested it. I asked why she'd been taking $800 monthly without asking where it came from or if I needed it back. She thought it was an insurance settlement. I told her there was no settlement. It was me. I'd been sending her money every month while she treated me like an embarrassment. She asked how I'd been sending money when I was supposedly struggling. So I told her everything. The remote job, the salary, covering Mom and Dad's mortgage, building a life while letting them think I was failing because I knew eventually they'd show me exactly who they were. She sat there processing, then asked if I had money. Why was I letting our parents lose their house? Why let her and Chester drown in debt? What was the point of having money if I wasn't helping family? I told her it was my money, and I decided what to do with it. She'd made her choices and got to live with them. She stood and said I was cruel and vindictive, and she'd never realized how cold I was. She'd always defended me to Mom and Dad, but now understood their frustration. I laughed, asked what she'd been defending me from when she put me on a do not admit list at her own wedding. No answer. She left. Thursday, my mom called crying. The bank confirmed mystery payments stopped and they had 60 days before foreclosure proceedings started. They'd been trying to get finances together, but Dad's business was struggling. She begged me to reconsider. I said no. She said I was destroying the family over a few jokes and did I really hate them? I told her I didn't hate them. I just didn't owe them anything anymore. She hung up. The messages keep coming. Emma has sent probably 50 texts. Dad called multiple times. Uncle Dennis somehow got my number and left a drunk voicemail. Even Chester tried calling from Emma's phone. But here's what none of them understand yet. I'm not done. The mortgage and Emma's money were just opening moves. Because there's something I haven't told them about why I know so much about Chester's situation. And when they find out what I know and what I can do with that information, this is going to get so much worse. So I appreciate everyone telling me to stand my ground because trust me, I am not backing down. Some of you asked what I know about Chester that they don't know I know. And honestly, that's where this gets really interesting because it's not just about Chester's job situation. Friday afternoon, my mom texted me saying the whole family needed to meet on Saturday to discuss this situation like adults. She said everyone would be at their house at 2 o'clock and I needed to be there. I didn't respond, but I showed up because I wanted to see how they'd try to handle this as a united front. I got there right at 2 o'clock and everyone was already in the living room. Mom, Dad, Emma, Chester, and Uncle Dennis, who apparently needed to be there for moral support. Grandpa wasn't there, which was probably for the best. They were all sitting around like this was some kind of intervention. Dad started talking first about how we were family and family works through problems together. He said I was clearly hurt by what happened at the wedding and they wanted to acknowledge that it wasn't handled well. Notice he said it wasn't handled well. Not that they were sorry or that it was wrong, just that the handling was off. Emma was sitting next to Chester on the couch and she looked awful. She'd definitely been crying a lot. Chester looked angry though. He kept clenching his jaw and staring at me like I was the one who'd done something wrong. Mom said they wanted to find a solution that worked for everyone. She said they understood I felt disrespected, but I needed to understand that family obligations don't just disappear because feelings get hurt. She said they'd raised me and supported me, and now when they needed help, I was abandoning them. I asked her if she wanted to talk about family obligations. I asked if putting me on a do not admit list at my own sister's wedding was a family obligation. I asked if publicly humiliating me in front of 100 people was a family obligation. She said that was different and I was being deliberately difficult. Chester finally spoke up. He said he wanted to apologize for what he said at the wedding. He'd been drinking and he didn't mean it and he hoped we could move past it. The way he said it, though, made it clear he didn't actually feel sorry. He just needed me to give them money. I told him I didn't care about his apology. I told him I knew he'd been lying to Emma about his job for 3 months. Emma's face went red and she said they'd already discussed that and it was between them. I asked her if they'd discussed why Chester had really lost his job. Chester stood up and said whatever I thought I knew, I should keep my mouth shut about it. Dad told him to sit down. Chester sat, but he was glaring at me. I told Emma that Chester hadn't just lost his job. He'd been fired for inappropriate conduct with a coworker. Nothing illegal, but enough that the company wanted him gone quietly. Chester's parents knew about it, which is why they'd been so cold at the wedding. They'd wanted Chester to cancel the wedding and deal with his situation first, but he'd refused because he needed Emma's family connections to help him find a new position. Emma looked at Chester. Chester told me I didn't know what I was talking about. Emma asked him if it was true. He said it was complicated and not the way I was making it sound. I asked him if he wanted to explain to Emma how I knew about it. He didn't say anything. So I told her. Chester's parents had reached out to me 6 months ago. They'd gotten my contact information because Chester had mentioned me in passing as Emma's brother who worked in tech. They wanted to know if I had any connections that could help Chester find a new job quietly. During that conversation, they told me everything about why Chester was job hunting. Emma asked why I'd never told her. I said because at the time I didn't think it was my place and I figured Chester would tell her himself. I also said I'd declined to help Chester's parents because even 6 months ago, I knew exactly what kind of person Chester was. Chester said I was lying and trying to break them up because I was jealous. Emma told him to shut up. She asked me what else Chester's parents had said. I told her they'd been concerned about the wedding expenses and they'd asked me if our parents were helping with costs. I told them I didn't know. They'd said they hoped Chester and Emma had a solid financial plan because they weren't going to bail Chester out if he made more poor decisions. Dad asked what any of this had to do with the mortgage situation. I told him it had everything to do with it because Emma had been taking $800 a month from me to help cover expenses that Chester couldn't cover because he'd lost his job and was too proud to tell anyone. And I'd been covering Mom and Dad's mortgage because Dad's business was failing and they were too proud to ask for help. And all of them had been treating me like I was worthless while I was literally keeping their lives together. Uncle Dennis said something about how I couldn't just hold money over people's heads like this. I asked him when he'd last contributed anything to this family besides drunk commentary. He got up and left. Mom started crying and saying I was tearing the family apart. I told her the family had torn itself apart long before Saturday. Saturday just made it obvious. Chester and Emma started arguing. She wanted to know why he hadn't told her about the real reason he'd been fired. He said it wasn't what I was making it sound like and I was twisting everything. She said she didn't care what I was making it sound like. She wanted the truth. He said the truth was that I was a manipulative person who'd been playing games with all of them for years. That made me laugh. I asked Chester if he thought I'd manipulated him into calling me the family stain at his own wedding. I asked if I'd manipulated Emma into putting me on a do not admit list. I asked if I'd manipulated Dad into announcing my personal failures to a room full of strangers. Dad said that was enough and we needed to focus on solutions. What would it take for me to resume the mortgage payments? I told him there was no amount of apologies or promises that would make me change my mind. He asked if I wanted them to pay me back. I said they couldn't pay me back even if they wanted to. Emma asked what I wanted then. If I didn't want money and I didn't want apologies, what was the point of all this? I told her the point was that for 3 years I'd been building something while they'd been tearing me down and now they got to see what it felt like to have everything fall apart while someone watched and did nothing. Chester said I was sick and I needed help. Emma told him to stop talking. Mom asked if I really wanted to watch them lose everything. I told her I'd watched them treat me like I was nothing for years. So yeah, I was fine watching them lose everything now. The meeting ended with Emma and Chester leaving first. Chester was still trying to convince Emma that I was lying about everything. Mom and Dad sat there looking defeated. Dad asked me one more time if there was anything that would change my mind. I said no and left. Sunday morning, Emma called me. Not texted, called. She said she'd talked to Chester's parents. Everything I'd said was true. She'd asked Chester to move out. She was staying at Mom and Dad's house. She needed to know if I had any other information about Chester that she should know about. I told her I'd told her everything I knew. She asked why I'd kept it from her for 6 months. I said I'd already explained that. She said she didn't believe me. She thought I'd kept it secret because I'd been planning to use it against them eventually. She was right, but I didn't confirm it. She said she didn't know who I was anymore. The brother she knew wouldn't do this. I told her the brother she knew never existed. I'd been this person the whole time. She just hadn't been paying attention. Now it's Monday and Chester has been blowing up my phone. He's threatening to sue me for defamation. He says I've destroyed his marriage and his reputation. His parents apparently cut him off financially after Emma called them. He's staying with a friend and he's furious. But here's what none of them know yet. I'm not done because there's one more thing I haven't told them about, and when it comes out, it's going to destroy what's left of this family completely. Final update. Okay, so this is happening in real time and I need to get this out while I'm still processing it because holy hell, this escalated faster than I expected. Tuesday morning, I got a call from someone I hadn't heard from in over a year. One of Dad's business partners named Lawrence. Yes, my dad and his partner have the same name, which has always been confusing, but whatever. Lawrence, the partner, asked if we could meet for lunch because he wanted to discuss something important about the business. I met him at this diner near my apartment. He got straight to the point. He said the business had been struggling for 3 years, not 2, and my dad had been making increasingly bad decisions. The other partners had been trying to convince Dad to step back from management, but he'd refused. They'd been looking for someone with actual business sense to help turn things around. He said he knew I worked in data analysis, and he'd seen some of my work through mutual connections. He asked if I'd be interested in coming on as a consultant to help restructure things. He said if I did a good job, they'd want to offer me a partnership position. He also said they'd been considering removing my dad from his management role entirely, and they wanted someone they could trust to take over that position eventually. I asked him why they were coming to me specifically. He said they'd heard through the family grapevine that I'd been helping my parents financially, and they figured anyone who could afford to cover a mortgage while working remotely must be doing well. They'd looked into my background and were impressed. I told him I'd think about it. He said they needed an answer by Friday because they were having a board meeting and they needed to make decisions about Dad's future with the company. I went home and thought about it for maybe 10 minutes. Then I called him back and said yes. Wednesday I had my first meeting with the other partners. There are 4 of them total and they all agreed Dad needed to go. They'd been documenting his mismanagement for months. They wanted me to come in as a consultant first, then transition to a partner role within 6 months. They'd buy out Dad's shares. He'd get enough money to cover his debts, but he'd be out completely. I signed the paperwork Wednesday afternoon. Thursday morning, Emma called me. She said Mom and Dad had gotten a letter from the business partners. Dad was being removed from his position. She asked if I knew anything about it. I told her I'd been offered his job. She asked if I'd taken it. Said yes. She started screaming at me through the phone, called me vindictive and cruel, and said I was destroying Dad's life over a wedding. I told her Dad had destroyed his own life by running his business into the ground. I was just taking advantage of the opportunity. She hung up. An hour later, Dad showed up at my building again. This time, he got past the front desk by following someone in. He came up to my floor and started banging on my door. I opened it and he was red in the face and shaking. He said I'd betrayed him. I'd gone behind his back and stolen his business. I told him I hadn't stolen anything. His partners had offered me a position because they didn't trust him anymore. He said I could have said no. I asked him why I would say no to a partnership in a profitable business just because it hurt his feelings. He tried to grab my arm and I stepped back. He said I was his son and I owed him loyalty. I told him I didn't owe him anything and he needed to leave. He said he'd fight this and the partners couldn't just remove him. I told him to check his partnership agreement because yes, they could. And they were. He left, but he was making threats about lawyers the whole way down the hall. Friday morning, I went to the board meeting. The partners officially voted to remove Dad from management and buy out his shares. They offered him $200,000 for his 40% stake. It's less than what it would be worth if the business was doing well, but given the current state, they said it was fair. He'd have 30 days to accept or they'd force the buyout at an even lower valuation per the partnership agreement. Friday afternoon, Emma called again. She said Dad was having a breakdown. Mom was crying constantly. They were going to lose the house in 3 weeks. Emma and Chester were getting divorced and she had no money. Chester's parents had cut him off completely. Uncle Dennis was still drunk and useless. Everything was falling apart. She said I'd won. I destroyed all of them. Was I happy now? I told her I wasn't happy or sad. I was just done being treated like I was worthless by people who couldn't survive without me. She said something needed to change. They needed help. I asked her what kind of help she thought she deserved from me. She didn't have an answer. Saturday evening, things got weird. I was at home around 9 o'clock when my building security called and said there was a group of people in the lobby asking to see me. I asked who and they said it looked like wedding guests. I told them not to let anyone up and I'd be down in a minute. I went down to the lobby and sure enough there was Emma still in her wedding dress which she'd apparently been wearing around the house for days because she couldn't afford to get it cleaned yet. Chester was with her in his tux shirt and dress pants looking completely disheveled. Mom was there in the dress she'd worn to the wedding. Dad was in his suit. Uncle Dennis was there too, looking half drunk. They all started talking at once. Emma was crying, saying, "Please, brother, please help us." Mom was saying, "I couldn't let them lose everything." Dad was demanding I turn down the partnership position. Chester was saying I'd ruined his life. Dennis was just rambling incoherently. Security was standing there looking uncomfortable. I told my family they needed to leave. Emma grabbed my arm and said they'd been outside my building for an hour trying to figure out how to make me listen. She said they were sorry. Everyone was sorry. It was all a mistake and they needed me to forgive them. I asked Emma if she remembered putting me on a do not admit list. She said yes and she was so sorry. I asked Chester if he remembered calling me the family stain. He said he was drunk and stupid and it didn't mean anything. I asked Dad if he remembered announcing my failures to a room full of strangers. He said he'd been trying to be funny. I told them all I didn't care about their apologies. They'd shown me exactly who they were and I'd spent 3 years planning for this. The mortgage stops, the money to Emma stops, Dad's business position is gone, and I'm taking over the company that bears his name. All of it was always going to happen. The wedding just gave me the perfect timing. Mom asked what I wanted from them. I said I didn't want anything from them. I wanted them to understand what it felt like to have nothing. They started getting louder. Emma was sobbing. Dad was yelling. Security asked if I wanted them to call the police. I said no and went back upstairs. It's 5 a.m. Sunday morning now and they're still down there. I can see them from my window. Emma's mascara is everywhere. Chester's tux is torn from where he apparently fell on the sidewalk. They're just standing outside the building looking up at my windows. Security said they've been there all night asking people who come in and out to let them into the building. My phone has 63 missed calls. The voicemails are all variations of please and we're sorry and make it stop. But here's the thing. I'm not making anything stop. They did this to themselves. Every decision they made led to this moment. I just stopped protecting them from the consequences of their own choices. The business partners want me to start Monday. I've got the contracts for Dad's buyout ready to go. The mortgage company starts foreclosure proceedings on the house in 2 weeks. Emma's going to have to figure out her own life without my money propping her up. Chester's already lost everything and his parents won't help him. And I'm sitting in my apartment that I could always afford watching the people who called me worthless beg for help from the family stain who apparently was the only thing holding their entire lives together. Someone in the comments on my first post asked if I thought this would make me feel better. Honestly, yeah, it does.